Very glad to bring on in this episode of the Leader of Learning podcast my colleague, actually from the same district, Mark Jackson. And Mark and I have, although we work in the same district, only really met up once in person, and it wasn't at school. It was way back when at an ed camp, if my memory serves correctly. But we've since sort of reconnected, and I'm glad to have you, Mark, and welcome to the show. And please introduce yourself to the listeners.
Hi, listeners. My name is Mark Jackson. I am the subject area leader for social studies at Roten Middle School, and I teach 7th and 8th grade social studies.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask you right off the bat, Mark, is we're basically halfway through the summer at this point, or maybe even a little bit more, like 2/3 of the way through the summer. And God knows, it keeps changing all the time. We don't really know what school is going to for sure look like when we get back at the end of August. And some people return middle of August, some go back in September. I don't know that anybody really knows. But I do know this about you, that you are someone who clearly takes teaching very seriously, and at the foremost in your work as an educator are your relationships with students. And what I know about you also is that you seemed to in my opinion, you seem to thrive even during distance learning. You might not have thought so or felt so, I don't know. But to me, it seemed like you really adapted to it, and you pulled out tips and tricks, and you had tricks up your sleeve. I don't know where they were coming from, but talk to us a little bit about that. If you could take us back like a couple of months, into your classroom, your virtual classroom. How did you do it? What were those tips and tricks that you were pulling out to connect or continue to connect with your students throughout?
Well, back in March, the beginning of March, when we were getting the notice that, we were going to be out of school, and we had a 1-day training to get everything together for a minimum of 2 weeks. And they were like, all right, you have 2 weeks to get everything together. So we sat down, we came up with a project. But one of the things I realized was, being the subject area leader, was the majority of my department never used Google Classroom before. And so luckily for myself, I've been using Google Classroom probably for the last 4 or 5 years. So I was pretty adept at using it. My students were pretty adept at using it. So it just came natural to showing my colleagues how to use that. And that gave us at least some footing to get going on all of this remote learning. It was a learning curve. Right away, I noticed that there was a disconnect for the students, because it just takes away that personal relationship with the teacher. It was hard to keep connected with everybody. And for me, I kept falling back on one of my teaching philosophies, which is, if I'm not having fun teaching, the kids aren't having fun learning. And so I kept looking for different ways to keep the kids engaged, because I'm the type of person that's a hands-on learner. I do project-based learning. I do experiential simulations. And so I tried to look at different ways to take my lessons and bring that back. One of the areas where I was weak was interactive technology. And so I spent hours looking through Twitter, finding engaging lessons or engaging technology. So I found Screencastify, where I was able to put my personal flair back into my lessons, because a lot of it was, I had kids checking in at different times. It wasn't just the one time. And so a lot of the kids were missing the Zoom lessons. So I found, by recording a lesson and giving the kids directions step by step through Screencastify, it was able to keep the kids engaged, and they were able to work at their own pace. So if they missed something, they could just rewind the video and go back. A lot of the kids enjoyed it. They said they wish the videos were a little bit shorter. In the beginning, I was recording like 20, 30-minute videos, and then I made them a little bit shorter, because I realized that it was a little bit long with 30 minutes. But I started using, I utilized Breakout EDU. I was using their virtual platform even before they realized that their virtual platform would become such a big thing. I was using Kahoots just to review concepts with the kids. Obviously, we utilize Zoom in our district. That's one of the things that we utilize. And then Google Classroom. But one of the things I made sure of was I was in frequent contact with the kids. I was talking to parents daily. I would always send a good morning remind because I use remind as a way to communicate with parents and students. So every morning at 7 o'clock, I'd say, all right, good morning. Today is an A day. And seventh grade, you have science, or eighth grade, you have social studies. And it was just another way just to keep things normal because I would always be there to greet the kids in the morning. So I tried to keep some sense of normalcy in amongst the chaos.
Let me back up a second and ask a follow up question to something that you just said a couple of minutes ago. You know, if you're not following Mark on Twitter yet, you will. When you do, you will definitely see that not only is he not afraid to have fun, whether it's in the classroom or distance learning and virtually, but Mark also likes to dress the part. Now, as a social studies teacher, this might be a little bit easier than some other subjects, but I guess what I'm wondering is like, what is it that got you to have so much fun, to want to be that teacher who says, you know what, I want to make my classroom that place where kids want to come, and I'm not afraid to be a little silly when I need to be. I'm not afraid to. I mean, some of the you've dressed like what, like pilgrims, pirates. I don't even know what, but I know you've dressed up. So where does that all come from?
A lot of it came from a few. It's been a while now. I would say about 5, 6 years ago. I read the book "Teach Like a Pirate" by Dave Burgess, and for the longest time, I always concerned myself with what others thought about me, and I would internalize the criticism I would get from other colleagues, and after I read Dave Burgess's book, um, I stopped worrying about that, and I just said, you know what, it's my classroom. If they don't like it, then it's too bad. And we're there for the kids. Well, I'm not there for me. I'm not there for everybody else. I'm there to help the kids. And if the kids aren't learning and having fun, then what's the point of being in school? I mean, anybody could pick up a book and read it. It's just a matter of how you deliver it. And for me, I just like, you know what? It just no holds bar. I just wanted to have fun. My first year as a social studies teacher, it's going back, this will be year 12 for me now. One of the things I did, I came to my mind was we were learning about medieval times. And so I had a medieval siege in my classroom. So I built a moat. I used a tarp. The kids had to use chairs and cardboard to build siege towers to get over the desks into the other kingdom and try to sack the castle. I bought some of those little rubber bow and arrows and foam swords. And I mean, the kids had a blast, and the kids to this day talk about how that was like the best lesson they ever had. So I just try to look at a lesson and I try to say, all right, what's the best way to engage the kids? And as far as the costumes go, I mean, that's just an added bonus because if the kids see that you're excited about it, they're going to be excited about it.
It's interesting you say added bonus because it is a bonus. It's going above and beyond. It's definitely extra, but not too many people will go to those lengths, and I think that's clearly what makes your classroom special and what makes the learning memorable for those students. I actually want to give a couple of shout outs to some really great social studies teachers that I've worked with in the past. And I'm not saying this to forget any social studies teachers, but Ed Salmon, who I think listens to this show, was a guy who actually taught social studies completely using simulations. And I worked with Ed back in 2005, I think it was, just before I became a teacher and had my own classroom. And he was killing it. He was doing some of those things like you're saying, where his classroom became a simulation of ancient Greece and Rome and medieval times. It was really awesome. Kevin Pierre was a social studies teacher that I worked with back in the day, and he made learning so much fun for his students. Kurt Bascom is another guy. I think you and he would get along great because not only are you amazing social studies teachers and like bringing the fun in the classroom, but big coaching, big into the coaching and sports. He coaches football. I know you do wrestling. But he I'm cracking up already. He actually had the school safety officers when we worked together in the Bronx arrest him for a simulation, if you will, a demonstration about something that he was teaching in social studies. So I guess all of this to say that there's something about social studies as a content area, but maybe something about social studies teachers too, that they're a little wacky. No, I mean that they're able to do some of this more fun stuff in their classrooms. Do you think it is unique though to social studies? I guess there's all of this to say, what are your thoughts about that? Can anybody do it in any content area, or is social studies kind of just its own
I,
animal?
I just think you can't be afraid to go out on that limb, because if you're afraid to try the unknown, you can't be. If you're afraid to fail, then you're going to fail, because you can't go in there thinking this is going to be the worst thing ever, because there were days I thought it was the worst lesson of my life. And then a kid turned around and said, that was awesome. And those are the days that make it worthwhile. Um, Even with remote learning, I was at my wit's end, because, I thrive with the interactions with the students. I'm like the big brother, but, I'm firm but fair. That's just my mentality. Being a coach, I coach at my school. I coach floor hockey, girls floor hockey, or indoor field hockey. And then I coach wrestling at the high school. So I see the kids basically for 7 years, because a lot of my former students at the middle school go up to the high school. So I keep these bonds with these students for years to come. And so not having those social interactions was just as hard on me as it was on the students. And a lot of the times the kids were like, that was awesome. The videos helped, because even though my costumes were locked up at school because of COVID, I was still
Come on, all
fine.
right, don't lie to the audience. You know you keep them in your closet at home.
No, my wife made me take them to school. But I have a whole wardrobe at school. I have a closet and bins, and the kids know that that's Jackson's wardrobe. So, I looked around with what I could scavenge around my house, and we were doing a unit on hurricanes and the impact in the Caribbean region, and I was pulling out my science tricks, because I taught science in the past as well, and so I was doing little cool science experiments and videos, and I was posting that to make the connections. The kids were like, wow, that experiment was awesome. I tried it at home. So it was just trying to find my quirkiness, to get into it. So going back to what your initial question was, I think any subject can do it. It's just you got to step out on that limb.
That's awesome. And, it kind of leads me back to, again, something that you mentioned a little while ago, which is project based learning. To clarify for the listeners, again, Mark and I work in the same district. I'm in one middle school, he's in another. Our school is actually, after next school year, not going to be just a middle school anymore. It's going to be a K to 8 STEAM magnet school. And not only are we making a big push toward, implementing STEAM content more, but in general, really bringing in project based learning. And I know that that's a big part of what you do. You mentioned, a couple of minutes ago about making the classroom fun, and that basically, you just have to go for it. But when it comes to project based learning, like, what are the things that you're thinking about? Is it all about that front loaded planning versus, waiting till the end to assess your students? I mean, what goes into kind of setting up that project based learning in the classroom?
I almost take the universal by design approach, where I look at the end and then I work backwards. It depends by unit. So for my which unit was it? Salem witch trials. What I had ended up doing was I created the hysteria early on in the classroom, before we even knew what the Salem witch trials were. So I had our assistant principal in on this gag, where I was like, "Do you want to play a prank on the classes?" And she's like, "Yeah," because we just finished doing a writing exercise, and I said, "All right, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to accuse somebody of plagiarism." So what I had, what is plagiarism and what does it mean, as my do now. And then, I texted her. I said, all right, I'm ready. So she came downstairs to my classroom, and I told her, I said, look, I'm like, with Google Classroom, it's a blessing and it's a curse. I said it's a blessing because it's easier for us to grade essays. I don't have to sit there and decipher your hieroglyphics or their handwriting. And I said, but it's a curse because you're the copy and paste generation. And I said, it's far too easy for you to either share a document and think I'm not going to notice the similarities, or you just copy and paste it from somewhere. I said, but there was one person that shared the same document multiple times across multiple classes. And I said, this is a serious offense. This is plagiarism. And so I said, you need to figure out who it is. I said, or the whole class will get a punishment. And my assistant principal, she said, Mr. Jackson will give me the name and that person will be suspended for X amount of days. Or she's like, the whole class will just come in for a Saturday detention. And so she walked out of the room. I'm like, all right, you figure it out. And I have a mini blind on my door. So I pulled the mini blind down and we both stood outside the door and you could just hear the hysteria going back and forth in the classroom. And then we gave him about a minute or two and we walked in and we're like, who did it? And it's funny to see how the kids start blaming each other. They start blaming the kid that would normally be the prankster in the class. Or they're like, we don't know who did it. I said, all right, I know who did it. And they're like, well, who? I said, you just recreated the hysteria in Salem in 1636. Welcome to the witch trials. And they're like, what? And so that's just like setting the scene. So I started at the end, and then I do the front loading where we go into the information and the kids take notes.
You know, it's interesting when you mention that story. I'm thinking of a time when in the classroom, and I know, you know, for all you ELA teachers out there, I know what you're going to say, that this has nothing to do with the skills or standards that I'm supposed to be teaching, and you're right. But there was one year I was still teaching back in the Bronx, and 8th grade ELA classroom, and we were reading The Giver, which is one of my favorite books to teach. And long story short, that book has a lot of these really unjust and unfair rules. And so we simulated that in my classroom, and I had the students come up with, I think it was maybe a list of 10 rules that were pretty wacky. They were really out there. One class decided that you had to enter the classroom backwards and dancing, otherwise there was some kind of repercussion. There was one class, there was a student who, I'm not sure whether she had a condition or not, so I don't want to make light of it, but she would somehow always like doze off and kind of take a nap in the middle of class. So they came up with a rule that if anyone fell asleep during class, I, as the teacher, got to slam a textbook down really loud to wake the student up, and then the student who was sleeping had to get up in front of the room and I think sing a song or something like that, which, I don't know, it maybe is like verging on corporal punishment, but it was really fun. It did happen one time and one time only. But no, we created these really silly rules, and I know that wasn't teaching them the skills and standards, but I'd like to believe that it was hooking them into enjoying and really like immersing themselves in the novel that we were experiencing together. Again, I know ELA teachers out there are like, you shouldn't be teaching the novel, you should be teaching the skills, and I'm all about that now. Trust me. But even then, just using that book as a mentor text and stuff like that, it was really fun to bring in some of that silliness. Yeah, I guess.
I'm the type of person, you mentioned the skills and standards, I'm the type of person where I work on the hooks and then I worry about the skills and the standards, because if you don't hook them, they're going to care less about the skills and the standards, because it's to them. If you sit there and read, all right, today you're going to learn RH4 and you're going to know how to cite text, they're going to be like, what? So if you show them how this all makes sense, then the standards just come natural to them.
Yeah, I mean, it makes it much more real world relevant. So I agree with that, and I'm okay with that. As an instructional coach, obviously, I'm really looking for the actual instruction, but I would never ever deny a teacher the ability or the preference to put one in front of the other in order to make sure that those connections are happening, the SEL component is there, and of course, like we just said, that relevance. You really can't teach a student unless they know for sure why they're learning something and when they're ever going to need it again, right? How often do we hear that? When am I going to use this outside of school? Listen, as we wrap up, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, because again, I know that you did all that you could and seemed to do a pretty good job during distance learning. But I'm wondering what your thoughts are about heading back to school in August and September. I know that things keep changing every day, and in full transparency to the listeners, we are recording this episode a few weeks before it's actually going to air, so things could change quite a bit. But right now, it looks like they're asking everyone to go back full time. What are your thoughts there? At least, let me clarify again. At least in our state and in our district, that's what they're calling for right now.
You know what? Before everything was released by the CDC and the state of Connecticut, I was a firm proponent on going back full force to get the kids back in the classroom. I'm in a unique situation where I'm teaching a hybrid class during summer school this year, and having to wear a mask for 3 hours a day, trying to give instruction in a completely opposite way that you're used to teaching, it's very difficult. The students are spaced 6 feet apart. They can't face each other. I have 9 desks in a room that typically holds 27. And the kids can't turn and face. You can't really do turn and talks. You can't share materials. And so it's gonna take a completely different mind shift for a lot of educators if we have to go back into this situation. And I'm the type of person where I'm wearing one of those neck scarves as a mask because the N95 mask for me, having wearing glasses, well, every time you breathe, it fogs up. So that makes it more difficult because then you can't see what you're doing. You need like windshield wipers for your eyes. Whereas I wear this neck scarf mask, that makes it a little more bearable to teach for 3 hours that way. But every time you talk, when you breathe in, you suck in the scarf and you start gagging on your own mask, or it starts falling off your face. So it's going to be very challenging for many educators, which is why I know many people are opting to retire early versus going back to that situation. So then you have not only new teachers coming into this situation. So, being an instructional coach is going to be interesting for you if you have to train new teachers, and being a subject area leader for myself, trying to teach new teachers the content and giving them unique ways to do it when we don't even know what it's going to look like, which makes it even more challenging. It's almost like the age of exploration all over again. We're venturing into the unknown, hoping that, we get the best case scenario.
Yeah, and I just really think it's going to be very difficult to figure things out on the fly. It sounds like summer academy for you is going okay, but that it would not be, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but it sounds like it would not necessarily be the ideal situation, or really probably impossible if it were to be the situation for all students to return in August, because there's not enough space. And if you are spacing, you said 9 desks where you would normally have 27, can't fit everybody.
Right. I mean, just at my school alone, we're going to have 625 kids. So I don't know, if we go to an every other day policy, with me right now, I have the hybrid class where I have half my students in right now. So I have a roster of 14 kids for summer academy. So I have 7 on 7 and 7. And so I have a para educator helping me, but I have a para educator running the remote session while I'm doing the live session at the same time. But it's an extreme amount of planning to make sure you have everything uploaded for those 3 hours and what the day is going to look like for the remote kids. And then you still have to come up with the lessons for the kids that are in the class. Mm-hmm. And then, on top of that, you're going to have assessments. You're going to have to monitor data. Then you're going to have to worry about COVID, where we were in summer school and one school is already shut down after 2 days because there was a case already reported. So, I mean, how long is that going to take when we come back in August if you have double the amount of kids in the building?
Right. Man, I don't, no one has the answers. Right. We're not sure what it's going to look like. And of course, no one is sure what's going to happen if a case breaks out, whether it's quickly or not during the school year. So I don't know, man, but I commend you for the work that you have been doing, the work that you're doing right now, even, going back in that hybrid model in person. And in a lot of ways, you're kind of that guinea pig, seeing how going back to school in person is or will be for teachers, when the school year starts. But I appreciate you and all you do. I really thank you for coming on to the show and giving us some time here. Again, if you're not following Mark on Twitter or Instagram, where can they find you?
I'm on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm pretty much on it all.
And you
So
are Spots Jaws. Is that
Spots
correct?
Jaws on Twitter and Instagram. Yep.
It's one of those quirks about you, I guess, right? Where did that name come
I
from?
mean, originally I did that because the term Spots Jaws was actually I had a koi fish and he ate every other fish in my tank, and his name was Spots, so I just started nicknaming him Jaws. So I just put the two and two together, and I've always stuck with that name.
Not the weirdest Twitter handle I've ever heard, and not the weirdest story about that Twitter handle. Mark, thank you so much.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate you having me on.